Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
The only thing I would like to add is I know we're in very tough times with the COVID fears and working from home and isolation. You know, if anyone is entertaining any thoughts of ending their own life, don't. It will destroy so many people. The best explanation of suicide I ever saw was on an NBC program with Red Reddington, which y'all may recognize. But in it, he said a suicide is like when a bomber walks into a restaurant or a building and he said those closest to the detonation are destroyed. There's nothing left of them. And, as you get into the outer circles further and further out, the decimation is less significant. I don't think anyone can really fathom until they've been through it how suicide is so destructive. So destructive. Anyone who's going through that, I just wish they'd find help. And as far as suicide prevention, we are really dropping the ball on suicide prevention. We have just made a mess of things. So if I were queen of the world, I would find a way to fix that.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
So tonight we have a very interesting guest, probably one of the most unique and compelling near-death experiences you will find. Her name is Rosemary Thornton. Rosemary is not only a near-death experiencer, she is also the author of a book called Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. Welcome to the show, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. I've heard you on several podcasts, so I'm glad to get you on this show. Before we kind of go into the long story that was really probably several years leading up to your near-death experience, I'm just wondering if you could just give us a quick check-in on who Rosemary Thornton was before the incident happened that triggered your near-death experience and tumultuous 2 or 3 year period for you.
Sure. Well, I had written 8 books on principally on architectural history. Specifically, my books were centered mostly on the old Sears kit homes of the early 20th century. And these were houses that were purchased right out of the Sears Roebuck catalog, 12,000 pieces of house and a 75-page instruction book, and a promise that the average man could have the house assembled and ready for occupancy in about 90 days. And I had a lot of fun with that. In fact, that book came out just as my first marriage ended in 2002, and I had kind of 5 years of wandering in the wilderness a bit, trying to figure out what was next. But the book opened so many doors for me. And it was such a blessing. And boy, I got to travel a lot and got to meet a lot of wonderful people. It really also lifted my self-esteem quite a bit to have people. I remember one time I walked into a hotel in advance of my coming to give a talk in that community, the paper had run a story about me and my book and, how I helped identify the kid homes in the community. And this delightful young woman behind the desk there, the hotel clerk, she reached out her hand and she said, "I've always wanted to meet a famous author." And I shook her hand back and I said, "I hope you do too one day." It was a rush and it was a lot of fun. And it was a niche book on a niche topic. And I don't think I'd go so far to say as I'm a famous author, but it sure brought me a lot of joy and an awful lot of blessings. And kind of as a consequence of that, I had enough self-esteem to do some internet dating, perhaps on a serious upgrade. Because I was a simple girl who'd written this book, and I met a man who was an attorney and completely fell head over heels in love. And I hope he did too. And we were spending every spare moment together. Our first date lasted 11 hours.
Wow.
And we had so much in common. I remember one of our first dates, we had a very long discussion about the presidency of Grover Cleveland and its impact on, its historical impacts through the decades. And I laughed because I thought, how many people could you meet that you could have a long debate about that? We were engaged to be married 6 weeks later. And so I really loved this man. I thought he was the love of my life. And I knew if anything happened to him, I'd never find another man like him. And then 10 years into the marriage, he came home for lunch one day and ended his life at our home. I've always been a very sensitive soul. I've always felt very in tune with the angels, felt very in tune with God. I've been a big believer in prayer, and I spent a lifetime, really a lifetime, learning how to listen to the angels and how to tune into the things of God and try to do the will of God. So to say this was a shock was an understatement. And when you lose God, which I felt like I did after his suicide, to say you're rudderless is quite the understatement. I didn't know where to go, what to do, or how to do it. And I lost my mind. I had a psychotic break. And, through the years, what got me into the Sears homes is I loved houses. But there's 370 designs of Sears homes, and all the sales records were gone. So the only way to identify the approximately 70,000 houses in the country is literally one by one. And I had memorized each of the 370 designs that Sears offered during their 32 years in the kid home business. And I realized I had an unusual brain. I could literally take a picture of an image in a catalog with my mind, and then I could tell you how many windows were on it. I could tell you the font, sometimes even the words on the page. So I recognized I had kind of an unusual ability to remember things. Well, that came back to haunt me after my husband's suicide. All I could see was how he looked after this, and all I could see was, let's just say, the rough details of his death. So that was very difficult. And I did have a psychotic break or a nervous breakdown, not sure what you'd call it, but I lost my mind. And I stumbled around for about 2.5 years this way. And after a time, I kind of got back on my feet a little bit mentally, but the pain didn't go away. And I didn't even really learn how to live around it. I was a mess. And then, one of the important facets of this is every night I had 3 prayers that I asked God. One was, heal me or let me die. I knew I could not go on in this state. And I was very clear. It was okay if I died. And in fact, I struggled mightily with my own suicidal ideations. When somebody, we talk about suicide prevention, which is one of my hot buttons, but when somebody loses a close loved one to suicide, like a child or a spouse, the odds of that survivor ending their own life are 12 to 48 times higher than the average person who hasn't experienced that. So if we want to look into suicide prevention, we need to look at the people who've already survived the suicide of a loved one and then help them. But I became a leper in society. I'd been married to an attorney and I was a writer. I was living out of my car for a brief period of time. So I fell pretty hard pretty fast. So we've got 3 prayers every night. God, heal me or let me die. I had to make a lot of very difficult decisions after my husband's death. So I asked God repeatedly, don't ask me to make any more decisions. I can't face it. I can't do this. I had severe decision fatigue to the point that I went out and I bought 12 white polo shirts and 4 pairs of jeans. So every morning I could pick out a white polo shirt and a pair of jeans and no decisions about what colors to wear, what shirt to wear.
That's what Stephen Jobs did, by the way, except he had a black shirt and black jeans. Yeah, so that was one less decision he could make.
Yeah, it was helpful. And then my 3rd prayer was I knew I wasn't going to be alive very long. I asked God, when I die, spare me the life of you. I had recurring nightmares of my husband's death. He used a gun. It was a very violent ending for him. So I had recurring nightmares and I asked God, no life review. So when I go, spare me that. I knew what happened to me. I knew what my life was going to look like. I had had these recurring nightmares over and over and over and over again. They were horrible. So those were my 3 prayers. And then 29 months into this, I'd been having some symptoms for several months, and I went to a doctor, and a gynecologist diagnosed me with cervical cancer.
Ugh.
And I was referred immediately to an oncologist, and they diagnosed me with cervical cancer stage 2. And then they did a biopsy to determine exactly how far this had spread. So, I mean, this was a hospital procedure. After the biopsy, after I was awakened and put in recovery room, I noticed I was bleeding profusely. And I mean profusely. And at this point, I was 59 years old. The RN came in to check on me, and I said, "Hey, something's gone wrong. I'm bleeding a lot." And she said, "Once you get home and lie down, you'll feel better." And I said, I don't know about that. But 3 times I made that declaration, and 3 times she told me, "Once you go home, you'll be okay." So go home I did. And once I was home, I realized the bleeding was getting worse, if anything. And I was standing in my shower because I had white carpet in my home, or almost was, really pretty. It's brand new. And I remember thinking, when you're bleeding out, you got to pay attention to housekeeping. That's certainly the most important thing. And I actually went and stood in my shower because I thought, I'm dying. And I had been really, really struggling with ending my own life. I wanted to. I was staying alive for other people. But boy, I tell you what, standing in that shower, I thought of the Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, God will show you a way out. And I thought, this could be my way out. This could be the answer to my prayers. All I have to do is sit down on this shower floor, and I am out of here. It's done, and I won't be the one who did it. I'll be out clean. And I was really thinking about that. And I was starting to get kind of lightheaded, and I knew once I sat down that'd be it. And as I was thinking this through and thinking about maybe this is God's mercy for my life, there comes a time when, I was talking to myself, and I thought, there's a time when the torture has to stop, and maybe this is it. But I also had the thought there'd been an awful lot of people who had done an awful lot of good things trying to keep me alive. So many people had stepped in to try to help and love me and support me in so many different ways. And I thought about them, and I thought, I should probably just face one more day. So I stepped out of the shower, and some friends were in my living room. They brought me home from the hospital, and I said, "You need to call an ambulance. I'm bleeding out." And, you kind of expect your friends to say, "Oh, it's okay. You'll be fine." And they said, the woman friend in my living room said, "Thank God," because she was terrified. I'll spare your listeners the details, but things were pretty messy at my house at that point. So I was taken by ambulance to a small ER in the city, and it was an ER that was not connected to a hospital. And at that ER, they made some more mistakes. I was lying on a gurney in a small cubicle in this little ER. Another RN was standing by my side, and I was pretty frightened because I knew this was bad. And I grabbed that nurse's hand and I said, "Promise me you're not going to let me die." And she was so solicitous and tender and thoughtful. And she took my hand, and she even brushed a tear away from the side of my face as I was crying. And she said, "Oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. We have many solutions for this." And then they gave me a shot of Dilaudid to diminish the pain. There'd been some pain. And then they walked out of the room, and they left me alone in there with a friend, the same friend that had been at my home. And they had a blood pressure cuff on me, one of those things that automatically inflates and deflates. I lost consciousness pretty soon thereafter, and I don't know if it was the Dilaudid or the loss of blood. I've told this story publicly to live venues, and when I say that they gave me a shot of Dilaudid, you can always pick out the medical personnel in the audience because they all gasp. It turns out Dilaudid is a morphine derivative, pretty much the worst thing you can give to somebody whose blood pressure is going down.
Wow.
Well, in no time at all, I lost consciousness. And my friend who was with me said at one point he looked at the blood pressure cuff and it said 32/25,
Yeah.
which is pretty much gone. He said at that point my eyes popped open. And I thought, that's so cool, hearing this story later. And he said, "You tried to sit up on the gurney." And he said, "You put your hands up and you tried to reach up." And he said, almost like a child reaching to be picked up by her father. And he said, he stood up and he looked in my eyes and he said, "Rose, what's wrong? What do you need?" And he said, "You looked right through me like I wasn't even there." And he said, "You talked to somebody that only you could see." And the next thing I flopped back on the gurney and closed my eyes. And he said, and then the blood pressure cuff said error. which meant probably my blood pressure was not even able to be read. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life, or the time of my death. I was having a great time.
That's almost like a lawsuit, like a litany of how not to take care of a patient. And I heard you on another podcast mention that you really didn't follow up with that. You were really just, the experience ended up being so positive for you. But man, I got to tell you, that's all the things they did seemed to be the wrong thing that got you to this near-death experience.
It was, but filing a lawsuit against somebody, taking somebody to court, is declaring war on another human being. And I didn't want that. I didn't want any part of that. Nobody in this story got up that morning and said, let's kill off that author from Virginia. Nobody said that. Everyone was doing their best, and yes, they made mistakes, and I bear them no ill will whatsoever. And the statute of limitations is up now anyway. But I also think that the title of that book is no coincidence. It was dying that saved my life. And I think I had to have this experience. And, we tend to get caught up in the whole drama of the thing. This thing happened, and then that thing happened, and then this thing happened. And I think at its core, my very strong feeling about the whole thing was that it was God saying, okay, she's not getting better. She's getting worse. How do we solve this? And a trip to heaven, I think, was the only way that I could have peace again, that I could be healed of the agony of losing my husband to suicide. I think it had to happen. I think it was almost divinely ordained. Because, I've written a book and I've done a lot of podcasts, and the podcasts have done very well. And I get an awful lot of emails from people, and there's a lot of comments at the different videos that are floating around, where people say, this helped me so much. This was such a blessing for me. So if that was the point, that I needed to come back so this story could help others, then I think that's the gig. And I think the incidentals of this doctor did this and this nurse did that and, this happened, I think they're very secondary to the spiritual side of this story, which is I could not go on the way I was.
I'm glad to kind of set that up at the beginning before we talk about your experience, which was incredible. You were dead or you were past, I guess, with your heart stopped functioning for at least 10 minutes. And you had a very unique experience. You want to walk us through what happened when you were on the other side?
Yes. And in fact, it was actually more than 10 minutes. And I do have medical documentation. I asked for and got my medical records from this event. It's 382 pages. So there's a lot of detail. And it is medically affirmed that my heart did stop, which as a writer, I used to be a newspaper reporter. I've written several books. Documentation is everything. I remember awakening from a deep, dreamless, unconscious state and being catapulted out of my body. And I remember thinking, this is so cool. And I mean catapulted. It was no little gentle floating away. I felt like I had been launched. And the impression I had was that there was this silver, sinewy cord from the crown of my head to the bottom of my heels. And it was like somebody pulled back on that cord like an archer's bow and let loose. And when that thing snapped against my back, that's what caused my soul or consciousness or whatever to just go flying through the air. And I was immediately launched into this blackness, and it was very dramatic. And it was almost frightening, but it wasn't. It was fun, almost jarring, but not. And the second it happened, I was like, my first words out of my new mouth were, my heart has stopped. And I kind of surprised myself even saying that. And then, I was talking out loud to myself. And the next thing I said was, how do I know that? And then I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And I'm floating away from my body in this perfect blackness. I couldn't see my body, but I was in this blackness that I've since heard described as velvety, which is a great way to describe it. It was actively comforting me. This blackness was like a warm hug from your mother. It was actively making peace and love and joy and calm and comfort. It was phenomenal. And I had never experienced anything as rich as this. There's a C.S. Lewis quote We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with food and sex and something else when infinite joy is offered us. And like a foolish child, how does he put it? We're like a foolish child making mud pies in the slum while a holiday at the sea is offered to us. And that's what it felt like. My whole life, I had just been this foolish child making mud puddles in the slums. And now I was experiencing, God's holiday, how God treats us. And that's how I felt. I felt, oh man, I'm God's guest here. I'm God's child. So shortly after this, after that comment, how do I know my heart has stopped? I don't know that's right. The next thing I thought was, I'm dying. And then being the good grammarian, I said, actually, you're not dying. You're dead. Because when you're going on to your reward, the most important thing is correcting your grammar. And that whole thing made me laugh out loud that here I am floating away from my body, obviously onto my next experience. And I am still cracking these goofball grammar-based jokes about getting the tense right. And there were so many elements to this, but one of them was my quirky sense of humor had gone with me. My uniquely intellectual way of seeing the world had gone with me. My natural curiosity had gone with me. But the beauty part, I was talking out loud just as I am right here, right now, and I could hear myself talk. And I thought, I don't have breath sounds. I don't think I have vocal cords. Pretty sure I don't have lungs. And yet I am producing sound so distinctly and so clearly. And I'm doing all of this without any of the mechanisms by which we believe speech to be created. And then also the thought that my morbid, funny sense of humor was still with me. And it was this incredible revelation that every single thing I am, down to my funny little giggle, because I heard myself laugh, and it was my laugh, every single thing that defines me had gone with me. And I remember thinking, what did I leave behind on that gurney? And I thought, fear, worries, anxiety, woe, a sad past, PTSD, upset, all the negative stuff had stayed behind. But what was journeying on with me was everything about me. Even the things that we might consider a goofball sense of humor, a quirky little laugh, a unique sounding voice, all of that went with me. And it was so comforting. And it really felt like it was God's way of saying, everything you are is coming. We didn't leave anything good back on that gurney. Nothing good is left back in that body, in that 59-year-old body. And there were so many thoughts that came at me from so many directions. One of my thoughts, I had not decided to take chemotherapy because just a lot of reasons. I didn't know what I was going to do. It was very frightening to me. We all know people who've been through chemotherapy, and it's awful. No way around it. And I was supposed to start once a week chemo and daily radiation within days. And I remember thinking, that has ceased to be a problem. I don't need to worry about that. And I thought about my husband's suicide. And I was honestly kind of grateful that I still had all the memories. And I remember thinking, I'm out of this. All that pain, all that suffering, I am out. And I did not do this to myself. I even sought medical care after the first medical care went so sideways. I sought additional medical care. And I thought, I am out. And honestly, this is no joke. I felt like I had been granted early release for good behavior. I really and truly did. I was gone. I was out. And I did not have one iota, not one jot or tittle of a thought of going back. I was just so grateful. Throughout my life, even after my husband's death, I had kept a daily gratitude journal. Every day I wrote 5 things out for which I was genuinely grateful. And, some days it was, I saw a butterfly in the garden today, or there was a beautiful sunset tonight, or some days it was fresh water. And my toothbrushes, I have a toothbrush. I'm grateful to have a toothbrush. But in this experience, the overwhelming feeling was gratitude. I was done. I was 99% sure life went on. But now I knew it went on. I knew it. I had no doubt about it. And the experience went on. But one of the things that happened, and I probably don't talk enough about this in my book. If I had to sum this whole thing up in 3 words, this experience of being in heaven, the 3 words would be, welcome home, dearie. because I felt surrounded by these spiritual beings. Couldn't see them, but I could feel them. And they were so in love with me. I felt so loved by them. My mom had been such a wonderful person, but she died when I was 42, and I still missed her so much. My father had abandoned us. I had some siblings to whom I was not close, and I just felt so alone in this earthly experience. But in this heavenly moment, I was enveloped in love, and they were so happy. And I mean happy. They were so happy that I was home. And they loved me right where I was. Throughout my life, I've always thought, if I can do this thing better, if I can lose 10 pounds, or if I can do one more book, or if I can get my byline in a big paper, or if I can make it to the New York Times bestseller list, if I can do this, or that, then I will be worthy of love. And what this experience showed me is, when these beings were around me, they were crazy about me. And I mean warts and all, imperfections and all, shortcomings and all. They weren't saying, if you can just get that book to sell a few more copies, you're going to be A-okay with us. No, they loved me. And I say this all the time, but they loved me as is. And it was so incredible. I didn't want to leave them. But one of the things that happened very early on is I felt the presence of a massive spiritual being to my left, slightly behind me, and way taller than me. And I'm still floating away from my body. I'm still floating in this blackness. But I turned my head to the left and looked up, and I said, with genuine curiosity, I said, "And who are you?" And the answer, before I could even finish the question, the answer was so clear and so concise and so powerful. The answer was, "You, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original." And I thought, that's Genesis 1:26 and 27. I've spent my whole life wondering, what does it mean to be the image and likeness of God? And I thought, whoa, he picked my favorite Bible verse and everything. There's an original. And I was just in awe of this. And, we use the word awe almost too much. Awesome, awe-inspiring. But I was in awe. And that answer came not just with words, but with an infusion of understanding. And that has remained with me. But that was a powerful event. And this just went on and on and on. And one of the things that happened is, while I'm still floating in this blackness, I realized this is very familiar. I've been here before. So I asked one of the angels, I said, I've been here before, like in this 59-year experience. I don't understand, but I've been here. And the angels told me, they said, "Do you remember your mom told you that you'd been given up for dead as an infant? And yet you had a remarkable healing, a dramatic healing. And, your mom was told that her prayers had saved you, and you went home." And they said, "You didn't almost die. You actually died as a newborn infant, but we sent you back then. That's why this feels so familiar." And I was like, wow, that explains so much. That would have been real good information to have way back there when I was made fun of in school, when my siblings made fun of me because I could hear the angels, when I saw things that others couldn't see. I always figured that I had this extra sensitivity because my mother had prayed so diligently for me. But after this, I came to see, when you have a near-death experience as an infant, it does kind of ratchet things up, and maybe there's a better way to say that. It infuses you with a different way of seeing everything.
You mentioned the large spiritual being was you, right? If I understand correctly. And was your understanding that a piece of you was taken away to live this life, and were there other pieces of you taken to live other lives? Or what was your thought about that?
My thought about that is that spiritual being that was so much bigger than me was what we would call God or the Holy Ghost or something, but it was not me. That I'm the image and likeness. I'm just the representation, the manifestation of God on this earth. And there is an original. And there are times when I still get sad, and I still have really crummy days and bad moments and everything. But when I do, I try to think about, there's an original. And that original isn't having this bad day. And I'm just going to think about the original for a while. So I would say it was not me. It was not some bigger representation of me. It was God. It was divinity, the Holy Ghost. I mean, I'm not sure. And one of the things I love is when people leave comments giving me some ideas of what they think it was. It was something so much bigger than me. If I had to define it in words, it would be, it is the creator of all that I encountered and was saying, hey, here you are. I'm going to answer your biggest question. And I don't even like the word near-death experience because my website is temporarydeath.com because this was not near death. Near death is when you're on an airplane and things are going bad and, but the pilot saves everything at the last minute. That's near death. I was dead with no heartbeat and no blood pressure for more than 10 minutes. That's not near death. That's dying and coming back. And there's a big difference.
So all of this was on your ascension into heaven or the afterlife. You go up, you realize I'm still myself, I've retained my identity, and your mind is active, you're thinking all these thoughts, even though your brain is down on earth. You've met the creator and other loving spirits around you. What happened next? What did you end up after that?
There's something called the Grayson scale for determining the depth of your near-death experience. I don't know if you're familiar with that, developed by Dr. Bruce Grayson out of UVA in Charlottesville, but on the Grayson scale, I had what is characterized as an unusually deep experience because while on Earth, I was gone more than 10 minutes. It felt like this went on for hours. One of my favorite quotes from Einstein is, to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. So we tend to put all this stuff on this timeline of Earth. But what is 24 hours? It's the time in which the Earth goes around the sun. What does that mean in heaven? It has no meaning. Einstein was telling us time is an illusion, but it's an earthbound illusion. So yeah, it felt like this just went on and on and on. But one of the things that happened while I'm floating away, I think this is the most perfect peace I've ever known. And I thought to myself, I've always wondered, which with me as a writer, who is very prone to anxiety and upset. And my superpower personally is rumination. I'm really good at it, practice a lot, and got it down pat. So I thought to myself in this experience, I've always wondered what I would look like with all that stuff gone. And I thought, I look pretty good. I feel pretty good. I'm a cool person when I'm not consumed by fear and worry. So one of the things that came to my mind, I thought about the Bible verse, the peace of God that passeth all understanding. And Paul wrote that. I think it's Corinthians, not sure. But I got it. This is that peace. Paul was saying, I can't even tell you how great this peace is. It just passes anything you're going to understand on earth. And I thought, this is the peace I'm experiencing that passes all understanding. And I also thought, I have all my memories. To the world, my brain was 6 or 7 pounds of hamburger meat compressed within a bony skull. But my memory was with me. It wasn't back on that gurney. I still had all my memories with me. And then ultimately, I don't remember the transition, but I was on my own 2 feet and I was standing in a big white room. And it was brilliant. It was brightly lit. And there was this fog or mist filling the room. But the mist wasn't just falling. It was around me. It was like almost engulfing me and surrounding me and dancing around me, swirling around me. And I remember seeing a door, 20, 30 feet in front of me. And I thought, I don't know if I have legs or feet or the mechanism by which this works now, but I know that I have an intention to get to that door. And that intention will produce perambulation, whatever that looks like. And I remember using that very word. And I knew what the door meant. Throughout my life, probably because of this NDE I had as a child, I had been fascinated by near-death experiences. And when Raymond Moody's book came out, I think in 1976, a little trade paperback, Life After Life, I read that thing so many times I wore it out. So I knew what that door meant. I knew that door meant, okay, this part of the journey's over. We're going to go on to what's next. And this earth thing is going to fade into a distant memory. So I couldn't wait to get to that door. And in this white room, with this mist falling around me, I remember trying to focus on an individual droplet of that mist. And I asked the angel or a spiritual being that was with me, why can't I see this? And the answer, again, was immediate. The answer was, your eyes have not acclimated to this new spiritual environment yet. But what you're seeing is a particle of light. And that light is cleansing you and purifying you and restoring you to your innate spiritual perfection, your purity. And it was explained to me that some people die with a disease process or even a mental limitation so heavily imprinted on their consciousness or soul that they think it's part of who they are. And the purpose of this white mist is to cleanse us. And the word that came to thought was like a spiritual car wash. And if you have a good car wash, it even gets the undercarriage. And that's what it felt like.
Or a baptism, a heavenly baptism, cleanses you just like a baptism does in the water.
It was, and it was very thorough. And in this process, and I don't remember again the specific mechanism, but it was made clear to me that if I went back to earth, I would be restored to wholeness. And that was the word. It wasn't you're going to be healed of this or that, or this will feel better, or this will be better, but I would be restored to wholeness. That was kind of like, good to know, out of my way, I'm doing the door. And I got to that door, and I paused at the door. The door was shut, which kind of irritated me. I thought the door should be open. And irritate is the wrong word. It kind of surprised me. But the door was shut, and I put my right hand up to push through that door. And I was pretty interested, right-handed on earth and right-handed in heaven. I thought that's pretty cool. But I paused, and I asked, is this the divine will for my life? That a medical mistake sends me on to the next world? And before I could even get it out, all I got out was, is this the divine? I couldn't even get out the rest of it. And the answer was immediate. The answer was no, it's not. But whatever you decide, if you decide to go forward or if you decide to go back, you go with all of God's grace and mercy and love and blessings and care. There isn't a wrong decision. And I was so comforted by that. And that phrase, there isn't a wrong decision, I think that applies when we are trying hard to listen to God, when we're trying hard to do the highest sense of right. What is the Westminster Catechism? The purpose of life is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I think if we're living in that, we're not going to go too far astray. But that's what I was told. There isn't a wrong decision. So I was like, okay, good to know. I'm doing the door. I want out of this. I'm done. I want to go on.
Quick question, if you don't mind. Was God what you expected? You're a very spiritual person. What's your religion? Were you Catholic, Christian?
Christian. Ever since I was 14, I had made a daily study of the Bible.
Wow.
In fact, people think it's funny, but I can recite lots of Bible verses just because, after you spend decades reading them, you know a lot.
Well, your mind is like a photographic. I think you had mentioned on a prior podcast that your ex-husband had kind of a same type of photographic mind. He didn't have to study for the bar.
Yes, he had an eidetic memory. He made me look like a piker. He was a truly brilliant man.
What did you think about God, though? Was God what you expected when you had this? Was it totally affirming to what your belief always was? Or
I guess the problem of who is God is a big question, and I don't know that I really had a fix on it. When I thought of God as Father, I just thought I don't want any part of that. My father was not a nice man.
Yeah.
Because when he left us when I was 14. That was it. That was it for 30 years. Didn't hear from him again. But when I thought of God as Mother, I thought, okay, I can wrap my mind around that. Everyone says God is love. Well, I could think of God as motherly love. So I can't say if it dovetailed with my pre-existing notions of who God is. I can say it felt so comfortable. That one of the things that impressed me about this whole event was there was no more striving. There was no more trying to deserve love. It was that love was a given. I feel like if I had gone to heaven as a drug addict that had been in jail for 20 years and had all this bad stuff going on in their life, I still would have had spiritual arms of love thrown around me and say, she's home. She's back. We're so glad you're here. It was just phenomenal. So I can't say that it matched what I thought of God because I wasn't even sure what I thought of God. But I know when I thought of God as Mother, and in my book I use a feminine pronoun to describe God sometimes. I don't know why, but that sets people's hair on fire. And I think it's great if you had a loving dad and you can wrap your mind around God as Father, but not all of us have that. And some people don't even have a good mother. So I guess that the closest thing, the Bible says God is love, and that is what I felt. God is love.
It seems like your ascension out of your earthly life to your heavenly life, you went from air and consciousness and air, and then you had consciousness in kind of a new type of energy, I guess. I'm curious what that felt like. It seems like it was a solo journey, with all the people that die every day on Earth. Did you have a belief after this that there is this personal ascension, and then are you with a bunch of others and you become one with others? Did you have any thought of that?
One thing that impressed me after I was back, because after I came back, they loaded me in an ambulance and whisked me away to a real hospital, was my whole life I've spent reading every NDE account I could get my hands on. I mean, there's a website that has all these NDE accounts. I systematically went through, there's probably hundreds of them. I systematically went through and read all of them and even made notes about them. So when I was being loaded into the ambulance to go to the trauma hospital, one of my first thoughts was, this was very different from anything I'd ever read about. There was no tunnel. There were no chimes. There were no wildflowers. There was no great verdant fields with sunsets. And I thought, I got my own tailor-made near-death experience designed just for me. And that even that filled me with awe. That the spiritual, God or the spiritual being that governs all was saying, hey, let's make this a little different for her because she has some special needs. It was just all of it was so incredible. And one of the thoughts I had was that I felt like 1/billionth of a drop of salt water being reunited with the ocean. That I was just this itty bitty little droplet going back to the ocean, an ocean of love and light, an ocean of goodness, an ocean of calm. So I remember feeling like I had forgotten. And that's what it was like. It was like remembering who I really was, where I'd come from, and where I was going back to. And like this earth was just some base camp, and actually not even that important. I still get tangled up by, when my driver's license needs to be renewed or my car insurance gets canceled for some reason I can't understand. I still get wrapped around the axle pretty quick on some of that stuff. But then I remember we are here so briefly, and this is all going to be over pretty fast. And all those little anxiety-provoking things really aren't that important. I don't know, but in this white room, I don't know if I answered your question sufficiently, but I went to open that door to go be on my way when I paused, and I asked, is this divine will? And I got my answer. I said, okay, I'm going. Good to know. Out of my way, I'm going, which is pretty much what I said. And at that moment, I saw that nurse that had promised me she wasn't going to let me die. And this was not a concurrent event. I think this was a potential future that I was witnessing. But that same RN was sitting in a hospital supply room, surrounded by linens and all the accoutrements of medical care, sitting on a little metal stool, head in her hands, leaning forward and sobbing uncontrollably. And I saw this. It was like I was in the room. It was like I was in the room witnessing this event. She couldn't see me. She didn't know of my presence, but I was watching her. And through tears, I heard her say, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I lost her. And I was like, oh, come on. Please. She's a nurse. She signed up for this. And I kind of said to the angelic being that was with me, she'll get over this. That's what you sign up for when you sign up to be in medical care. And I was like, okay, well, I'm sorry for her, but I need to go. And then I was not just watching her, but I felt that agonal grief. And I recognized that deep grief as the same kind of grief I had experienced after my husband's suicide. And I thought to myself very clearly, if I can spare one person that much pain, I have to go back. And boy, was that tough. And I put my right hand back at my side, and in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney in my body. There was no whoosh. There was no going, back through a tunnel. I was instantly back on that gurney. And frankly, a little angry, a little miffed, perhaps not angry, but miffed that all this work of dying. I mean, I had come out of the hospital about noon, and I'd gone into that little ER about 5. That'd been a lot of difficult moments. But there I was back on Earth. Kind of funny now, but that same RN, I'm not sure, I think it was the same RN, but as soon as I opened my eyes, she's in my face, and she says, what was it she said? What is your name? And I said, Rosemary. And she said, what year is it? And I said, 2018. And she said, where are you? And I said, a crummy excuse for an ER, which, seemed like an appropriate answer. But I know, it's kind of interesting. I interviewed some medical personnel for my book, but I learned It's believed after 3 to 5 minutes without any oxygen flow to the brain, there's significant damage. After 5 minutes, it's believed that it's mush. And when somebody dies of bleeding to death, they can't even do CPR because all it does is push more blood out of the body. So I asked an ER doctor about this. What they do is, what he said was, they plug the leak, refill the tank, and restart the heart. So they have to do those 3 things in order. So I was a little miffed to be back. It took me some time, and I had to find another oncologist. When I went back to that first oncologist and I said, good news, I don't need to do the chemo, I was healed in heaven, he wrote on my chart, mentally ill. Because, this new chart thing, they do the sharing, so you can go online and look at your chart, which, I hadn't been in the medical world in a while. I was like, whoa, that didn't go well. So I had to find another oncologist in another part of the state. And it took another surgical biopsy where she took lots of flesh from lots of places. But it was affirmed, as she said, not one cell of cancer was found. And she said, in fact, your flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect, I wouldn't believe you ever had cancer had I not seen all the tests. So it was a very dramatic healing. But the real healing, in my mind, the real healing was that agonal grief I had experienced from my husband's suicide was largely gone. And I opened my Bible when I was home, because I had to have 2 weeks of care at home. I was in the hospital for several days. I opened my Bible to Psalm 23, and it was like this one line was highlighted in the 23rd Psalm, and it was, He restoreth my soul. And I realized that's what happened in the White Room. My soul was restored, and that was the real healing.
I've heard you on podcasts say that as soon as you came back, 95% of you felt like you were still in heaven or the other realm.
Yes.
And 5% felt earthbound. And then over the course of several days, it kind of went away and you were back to 100% material you. And that was kind of a depressing thing to have to deal with.
I wouldn't say, I don't think I ever went back to 100%, but I think, like right now, I feel like maybe 2 or 3% is still very connected to heaven. And the balance is very much on earth. Earth is a very dense place. It's very easy to get sucked into the heaviness and the muck. One of the things I was told about my husband's suicide, because after I came back from this, I felt very close to the angels. And thank you for remembering that. It was 95. I told a lot of people that. I really felt like I was 95% still in heaven. But one of the things that happened when I was in the hospital, because I had never been in the hospital for anything except birth and 3 healthy babies. But when my friends would step out of the hospital room to go get a bite to eat or whatever, the angels would appear at my bedside. And they would stand on the 3 sides of my bed, and they would sing me the most beautiful songs, unbelievably beautiful songs. And I would sob. I've often said it was like trying to put 100,000 amps into a 60-amp breaker panel. I would sob at the beauty of it. And I said, I'm really good at houses, but I'm not so good at melodies and lyrics. I'm never going to be able to remember this. And the angels said, this is not for you to remember. This is for your peace, this is for your joy, and this is for your healing. This is to help heal you. And they said, and this is also a thank you for agreeing to come back. They said, we know how hard it is to see heaven and come back here. So this is our thank you. And that was a big deal.
What did they look like? I mean, could you see them? Did you just hear them? Or was it in your mind? Or did you actually see them around the bed?
Oh, I could see them.
Like Ebenezer Scrooge, but actually you had a much better experience, right? I mean, did you actually see them as beings? Were they fully materialized or were they kind of luminescent or I don't know. What was it like?
I could see them. I mean, like a human being stepping into the room. Luminescent is a great word. That is a good word to describe them, but they were tall, probably 6.5 to 7 feet tall. They surrounded the bed and they had a humanesque form and they were draped in gowns that were made of energy and light. I mean, the gowns were not fabric. The gowns were made of light. And they were sparkly, very, very sparkly. And they were very white. The purest white has, well, this is for paint. Of course, I know about paint. But the purest white has an element of blue in it. And they were that perfect, pure white. And as they sang songs glorifying God and praising God. And as they sang songs, they glowed more and more brightly. And I just wept. I wept. It was incredible.
You've talked to angels your entire life. Is this the first time you've seen them, or did you recognize any of these angels?
I guess it is the first time I'd see them. I had actually seen I mean, we catch glimpses of things and we think, hey, did I just see what I thought I saw? But this was not some ethereal, out of the corner of your eye thing. I mean, they were there surrounding the bed. And, I guess in my mind's eye, I can close my eyes and feel like I'm seeing angels, when I hear their voices and hear messages. But this was very different. This was seeing them. It was like these beings. One, they did not walk into the room. They just appeared at the bed. And it was when my friends walked out. And the message I kind of gleaned from this is, you're not alone. Your friends had to step out, but we're right here.
Mm.
We're right here with you.
Now, after this event, there are other really interesting and intriguing and even painful things that you went through with the spousal suicide that triggered your depression. But we'll save that for people to read the book. But you certainly have a writer's mind, and you went back and you documented things. Looking back, this is probably 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago. Was there a realization after the fact that really, like an aha moment that really struck you that said, man, I understand things much better than I did before?
Well, one of the things that happened, one of the things I love, because who doesn't love a good NDE, right?
Yeah.
And I've already had, I used to give public talks, and I do a lot of Zoom talks and occasionally a live audience. And one of the big questions I get is, how do you know this wasn't just the brain shutting down? And I love it. I love that question because I feel like they're walking right in on it,
Yeah.
But it's such a simple answer. If my brain shuts down, I would not have come back healed of stage 2 cancer. And secondly, I would not come back healed of a spousal suicide. One of the things the angels told me as I laid in that hospital bed is they explained to me that all the details, all the bad stuff of my husband's suicide had been encapsulated. And they said, you can't say it never happened. You can't say it never touched you. You can't say, it spiritually it never happened. They said, but what we can tell you is it's been encapsulated. It's been sealed in material that, yes, it's this thing and it's this thing over here, but it can't leach out. The toxins from that can't hurt you again. And that meant so much to me because I don't know how much you know about architecture, but sometimes in old houses, it's better to encapsulate contaminants than to try to remove them, because sometimes in the removal of contaminants, you spread them around even worse. So this very thoughtful explanation of how this whole horrible thing had been encapsulated brought me so much peace. And I was able to forgive my husband. I was able to forgive myself. Anyone who's been through the suicide of a close loved one knows it's hard work to forgive yourself. But I was able to forgive myself for all of it because I saw it from a very different angle. It was a horrible thing, but it couldn't hurt me anymore. It just couldn't cause me any more damage. And that's what was made clear to me. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. We had a good life. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. We had a good life. I was like, those are the wrong questions. That's not the right thing to be asking. I loved him. I really loved this man. And the angel said to think of it as, you didn't need to have an object of your affection. You loved. And in the act of loving, you're naturally uplifted and purified and made better. And they said, so yes, you loved him and you did a lot of things right and you made mistakes, but you did your best. And one of the things that was made very clear to me, my husband had been an agnostic. And throughout our married life, I had tried to bring him to Christ, tried to show him the wonderful blessings of Christianity. And I had felt such guilt that he died an agnostic. And the angel said, we are to work out our own salvation. Stop trying to work out his. That's between him and God. Work out yours. That's your job, is working out your salvation. And boy, was that a blessing. That was a huge, I was absolved of guilt.
That's definitely something a mother would tell you, not a father, probably. I think so. Maybe you're right on the end. How do you deal with it? Are there certain times a year where you really get, sentimental, or you miss where you came from?
Well, tonight I'm actually visiting friends and family back in Virginia. And tonight there was a lovely sunset. I was actually out at a small regional airport visiting some friends and just hanging out there. And there was a beautiful sunset. And after the sunset, watching that sunset, I burst into tears. And I thought, what is this about? Why am I crying? And I thought, I just wish he was here to see it with me, you know? I just wish things had gone the way they were supposed to go, that I would grow old with him, he was 8 years older than me, and that one day I'd be at his hospital bed and I'd hold his hand and kiss his brow and hope and pray for a peaceful passing. So yeah, even 7 years out, almost 7 years now, I still feel sad sometimes. But it's not the regret and the guilt and the oh no's. I just miss him. I just wish I could talk to him one more time. I wish I could send him a picture of a sunset. And I wish he could call me and say, boy, that sure is a pretty sunset. I miss that a lot.
And do you have hope that you'll have that when you actually do die, that there will be some kind of reunification, or do you just wait and see?
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, I'm 63, almost 64 now. I have zero doubt that we'll all be together again, because I'm already at an age where so many people I love have gone on. So many people. I swear I have more people in heaven than I have, a lot more people in heaven than I have on earth.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that we will all be reunited. And as far as the beauty, I really believe that the things we see on earth, I do crave beauty now. I literally crave beauty, like a famished hunger for it. I think it's just kind of a glimpse of heaven. I think when we see something like a beautiful sunset and all the clouds and the crepuscular rays of the gloaming, never thought I'd find a way to put that in a sentence.
It's on a podcast now, too.
I think we're just seeing a hint of heaven, a hint of heaven's glory and beauty here on earth.
That's your next book. Yeah. Well, your book that you just wrote, that'll be your 11th book. Your 10th book is Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. Your website is www.temporarydeath.com, because you look at a near-death experience as kind of a incorrect term. Is you call it a temporary death experience. So remember that, listeners, www.temporarydeath.com. Is there anything else you'd like to promote?
The only thing I would like to add is, I know we're in very tough times with the COVID fears and working from home and isolation. You know, if anyone is entertaining any thoughts of ending their own life, don't. It will destroy so many people. The best explanation of suicide I ever saw was on an NBC program with Red Reddington, which y'all may recognize. But in it, he said a suicide is like when a bomber walks into a restaurant or a building with a vest on filled with explosives and bombs. And he said those closest to the detonation are destroyed. There's nothing left of them. And, you know, as you get into the outer circles further and further out, the decimation is less significant. I don't think anyone can really fathom until they've been through it how suicide is so destructive. So destructive. Anyone who's going through that, I just wish they'd find help. And as far as suicide prevention, we have got it so bass-backwards in this country. We are really dropping the ball on suicide prevention. We have just made a mess of things. So if I were queen of the world, I would find a way to fix that.
One of my earlier guests is a gentleman, a friend of mine. His name is Andy Grant, and he wrote a book called Still Here, How to Succeed in Life After Failing at Suicide. Unfortunately, he tried to commit suicide several times, and he's come back and he's become a spiritual energy healer and energy coach for a lot of people. But he does have to battle those demons once in a while. He was on the show. He's been on the show like 2 or 3 times, but he has a very good book out there for people if they're feeling darkness that might give them a little light too.
Yeah, we've got to find a way to curb that problem in this country. I mean, it's so devastating. And I mean, I talk to a lot of people now who've lost somebody to suicide. They'll never be the same person. And people say, oh, it's great you've been to heaven, you're healed and all that. There will always be a certain gravitas to my personality, to my essence. I will never be the same person I was before this. You know, I'm okay. And I feel this has been a very dramatic healing in so many ways. But Rosemary, before my husband's suicide, she is no more.
Yeah, that's it's so interesting. One thing you mentioned on a prior episode, prior podcast was when the police come to document the suicide, they don't clean up. They leave it to the spouse or the family that's in the house to have to deal with the remnants of that. I can imagine the trauma, or maybe even can't imagine what you went through and the impact it had. And very glad that you were able to come back and really make this experience something that's changed your life and is helping others too. So thank you so much for your time, Rosemary. I really appreciate it. It's a great book, and we recommend that people check it out.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.